Well, this is going to start a few arguments in the comments section. With all the strikes going on in Germany at the moment, should the right to strike be restricted in some way? Should laws be passed to make strikes less common, especially when they affect important stuff like public transport or healthcare? There are a lot of strikes going on at the moment. Train drivers, local public transport staff, ground crew, cabin crew. This is very inconvenient for people who are trying to travel. But before we can ask whether the law needs to be changed, we need to first discuss what the law is. And in researching this topic, the biggest surprise for me came right at the very beginning. In Germany, strikes are not regulated by law at all. There's just one article in the Basic Law, which is Germany's constitution, allowing workers to form unions to help fight for better pay and conditions. The rest is the court's interpretations of that article. Over the decades, the courts have established that strikes are allowed under certain conditions. Most importantly, a strike must be a last resort by a union to achieve better pay and conditions for its own members. What I'd always thought was strictly regulated by law is actually a matter of convention backed up by court rulings, with the courts basing their rulings on the general principle that the purpose of allowing strikes is to level the playing field. Workers need to have some kind of leverage so that they're not completely powerless against their employers. It works like this. A union negotiates a wage contract with its members' employers. This contract is valid for a certain period of time during which both parties are bound by its terms. When the contract expires, the union and the employer must negotiate a new contract. And obviously, the union is going to want to take the opportunity to try to get better paying conditions for its members, while the employer will want to resist that. So negotiations are not going to be easy. What's expected to happen is that the employer offers less than it's prepared to settle for, the union demands more than it expects to get, and the two meet somewhere in the middle. If the union feels that it isn't getting a fair deal, it can take industrial action, and that can include strikes. And there are two types of strike that can be called. A warning strike can be called while negotiations are still ongoing. This type of strike can be called at short notice. It lasts for a relatively short period of time, usually less than a day, and when it is called, a time is specified for when it ends. Now, apparently there is some discussion over whether or not this type of strike is consistent with the principle that a strike should be a last resort. But so far, the courts seem to have sided with the unions on this question. If negotiations break down and no agreement is reached, the union can call for an enforcing strike. This is a bit trickier to organize because first, the union members need to vote on the matter, and that can take some time. Only if a majority of the membership agrees can the strike go ahead. Unlike a warning strike, an enforcing strike is open-ended. No date or time is given in advance for the end of the strike. It ends if both parties agree to return to negotiations or go into arbitration, or if one side backs down. The employer cannot discipline or fire workers when they go on strike, provided, of course, that the strike is official. But they don't have to pay the workers for the period they are on strike. Instead, the workers receive strike pay from a fund maintained by the union. Once that fund is used up, striking workers don't get paid at all. This means that the union has to be strategic with the way that it uses strike action. If it's too eager to strike, it risks losing the support of its own members. Still, though, we have unions like the GDL, which represents train drivers and is known for its hardline stance in wage negotiations, seriously impacting a very important service, leaving it open to accusations that it is holding the nation hostage and ruining the economy. And so various politicians, economists and company bosses are calling for tighter regulations. The unions are against this for very obvious reasons, not least of which is that it interferes with a very important democratic right. It's also been pointed out that while it may feel as if there are a lot of strikes going on in Germany at the moment compared with some other European countries, for example, France, it's actually not that many at all. It's just that the ones going on right now happen to affect a lot of people. One of the arguments for regulation is quite simply that Germany should probably fall in line with other European countries and properly codify strike regulations in law, instead of leaving it to the courts to basically make it up as they go along. Some are calling for tighter regulations in relation to critical infrastructure, such as the electricity grid, where strikes could potentially put lives at risk. Others go further and suggest that strikes in, for example, rail transport cause a lot of damage to the economy and should therefore also be restricted. As to what concrete measures are being proposed, I haven't so far seen anyone with any real influence arguing that strikes should be banned altogether. The focus seems to be on the idea of strikes as a last resort. This can be, for example, mandating a minimum period of time during wage negotiations before a strike can be called, or a law saying that a strike cannot be called until an attempt at arbitration is made. Arbitration is already a method used to resolve industrial disputes. Each side nominates an arbitrator, an independent expert that they can trust to be able to argue their case. The arbitrators facilitate negotiations and then come up with a compromise. If the employer agrees to the proposal, then the union ballots its members, and if enough union members also agree to the proposal, the contract comes into force and the dispute is ended. So the idea would be to make it a legal requirement that arbitration at least be attempted before the union can call a strike. That would make a strike truly a last resort. However, I do see one problem. It's actually quite important that both sides go willingly into arbitration. They both have to agree to it. But any law requiring arbitration would have to make sure that an employer cannot prevent a union from striking simply by refusing to go into arbitration. So what do you think? Do the unions have too much power or too little? Or is there a better way of ensuring a level playing field without disrupting the lives of millions of people? His thought was, I have no idea what that was.